There is a moment this story wants you to hold first before it explains itself. A summer morning in 1887, the kind of morning that arrived in the hill country of central Missouri, already tired of its own heat. A young woman named Cora Voss stood at the edge of a dry creek bed with 60 pigs at her back, and every neighbor she had ever known stood on the other side of it watching her. The creek had not run since March. The town well was down to mud. The corn across the county was so brittle a man could snap a stalk between two fingers the way you snap a twig for kindling. And Cora Voss was smiling. Not a large smile, not a smile designed to be seen, just the small, private, unstoppable expression of a person who has been right for a very long time, in front of people who were very certain she was wrong. The pigs were not starving anymore. They had not been starving for some time. And the ground behind her, the rough, rock-choked, briar-tangled 40 acres that no one else had wanted, was the only green thing visible in 3 directions. 2 years earlier, she had paid $18 for 60 feeder pigs that a man named Harold Ennis could not sell to anyone else. This is how that started. Cora Voss was 22 years old in the spring of 1885, and she was alone in the way that early settlers sometimes were alone, which is to say completely. Her father had died of a chest sickness the previous November, leaving her a small house at the edge of town, a mule named Douglas, who had strong opinions about Mondays, and a parcel of land 2 miles northeast of Haller's Creek that the county recorded without sentiment as the Voss 40. The land had a reputation. It was the kind of reputation that land acquires when it has defeated everyone who tried to use it. 3 separate families had broken themselves against it in the previous decade, 2 of them homesteaders from Ohio, and one a German immigrant named Schreiber, who had tried to run cattle on it and lost 8 head to a gully wash in a single night. The problem, as every man in Haller's Creek would explain to you at length, was the rock. The Voss 40 was underlaid with limestone shelf that broke plow blades the way a boot breaks ice. You could not plant it. You could barely walk it. The eastern third was so covered in briar and scrub oak that the light barely touched the ground. There was a depression in the center of the property that everyone called the Hollow, and the hollow was full of mud in spring and iron-hard clay in summer, and the bones of Schreiber's ambitions scattered among the rocks. Cora had grown up watching that land lose. She had also grown up watching her father tend a small orchard and a kitchen garden with a patience and attention that looked almost devotional, and she had inherited, along with the mule and the house, his habit of watching the ground rather than the sky when he wanted to know what was coming. She knew the Voss 40 was difficult. She was not convinced it was dead. What she needed was money. She had $11 and some coins, a winter's worth of firewood she could sell, and the house, which she could not sell because she had nowhere else to sleep. She did the arithmetic in the dark, the way you do when the numbers are small and the needs are large, and she came up short every way she tried. The county had taxes on the 40 coming due in August, $4.60. She needed to feed herself through summer. She needed seed if she was going to use the small cleared patch along the south fence line that her father had once used for a kitchen garden. She needed, in short, a way to turn the Voss 40 from a liability that cost her money into something that paid. She did not know yet what that something was, but she had learned from her father that the first step in any hard question was to look carefully at what you already had before deciding what you lacked. What she already had was 40 acres of the roughest, rockiest, most root-tangled land in the county. She also, though she did not know it yet, had the one kind of livestock perfectly suited to turn rough, rocky, root-tangled land into something worth having. It was old Marta Hofer who told her. Marta was 71 that spring, a Bavarian woman who had come to Missouri with her husband in 1851 and outlasted him by 19 years and most of the other early settlers besides. She lived in a low house at the bend of the main road with a garden that produced, year after year, vegetables of a size and quality that the rest of the county regarded as something between a natural wonder and a personal rebuke. When Cora walked past her gate in March carrying firewood to the mill to sell, Marta was at the gate already, as though she had been waiting. "You are going to plant the 40?" Marta asked. "I'm going to try to do something with it," Cora said. Marta made a sound that was not quite agreement and not quite dismissal. "My husband tried to plant limestone shelf," she said. "He was a good man and a willing worker, and the limestone did not care." She looked at Cora the way people of great age sometimes look at the young, with a patience bordering on tenderness. "But a pig will root what a plow cannot move." Cora did not answer at once. She was watching Marta's garden, which was just beginning to show the first gray-green pressure of early growth through last year's composted straw. "A pig roots for something," she said. "It has to smell something worth getting to." "Yes," Marta said very simply. "So you must think about what is under your ground worth getting to." And she went back to her garden, and Cora went to sell her firewood. And the conversation had the quality that certain conversations have, the quality of a door left ajar that you do not quite decide to open until later, in the dark, when you finally have time to think. Harold Ennis ran feeder pigs. More precisely, Harold Ennis had been trying to run feeder pigs on flat bottomland corn, but in the spring of 1885 the bottomland corn had flooded twice and then rotted in place, and Harold Ennis had 60 pigs he could not afford to keep and could not find a buyer for, because the whole county knew his pigs had been on poor feed since January and looked it. They were, by late March, a sorry collection of animals. They were thin in the way that makes ribs visible and haunches sharp, and they were mean with hunger, and the two largest had broken through Harold's fence twice already looking for something better than what they had. Harold was offering them at 30 cents a head, which was a price that told you everything about how badly he needed them gone. Cora bought 60 of them for $18, which was every dollar she had in the world except for the coins. She hired the Dewey boys to drive them out to the Voss 40 for $1 of that, which she paid in credit against the butter she planned to make come summer, a debt she did not yet have the means to honor, but intended to. She patched the fence around the 40's perimeter with salvaged wire and split rails, a week's worth of work that left her hands raw and her back aching in a particular low way that would not entirely leave for 2 years. She directed the pigs into the hollow. The town's opinion of this was prompt and unanimous. 60 starving pigs on 40 acres of rock, said Frank Geller, who ran the feed and grain and kept a kind of unofficial account of the county's follies. She'll have dead pigs by July and nothing to show but hog smell and a tax bill. A young woman alone cannot manage 60 head of anything, said Dora Spearman to anyone in the general store who would listen, and in the general store everyone listened. It is not a question of willingness, it is a question of what is sensible. Those pigs are half starved to start, said Reuben Haas at the mill, not unkindly, because Reuben was not a cruel man, only an exact one. A half-starved pig on poor ground is a dead pig on a schedule. Cora heard all of this, as you hear everything in a small town, through the ambient medium of errand and supply buying and Sunday service. She received it the way she received difficult weather, which is to say she noted it, filed it, and went back to work. There was a great deal of work to go back to. The pigs, in those first weeks, confirmed every skeptic's prediction almost perfectly. They were miserable. They stood in the hollow with their narrow haunches tucked and their ears flat, and they ate the thin grass and the clover and the soft roots along the mud margin, and they were not impressive animals. The two largest, whom Cora had privately named General and the Senator, fought over every scrap with a focused bitterness that suggested they had not yet accepted their situation. The others watched with the hollow-eyed patience of creatures that have been disappointed by life and are not sure whether to be surprised by more of the same. But Cora watched them more carefully than they watched each other. She was at the 40 before first light, and she walked the perimeter fence and she walked the hollow, and she watched where they rooted and how deep and what they were after. She brought them kitchen scraps and spoiled cornmeal from the mill and the green tops of whatever was coming up in the kitchen garden, and she counted them every morning and every evening with a small stone she moved from her left pocket to her right pocket for each head, 60 stones making the transfer, and if 59 stones made it, she went looking. By the 3rd week of April she noticed something. The pigs were not rooting randomly. Across most of the hollow they nosed at the clay and the thin grass with the mechanical determination of hungry animals. But in the northeast corner of the hollow, where the limestone shelf angled down toward the lowest point of the property, 3 of the smaller sows, the ones Cora thought of as the sisters, were returning every morning to the same patch of ground, a stretch of perhaps 20 feet along the base of the limestone ledge, and they were rooting with a different quality of attention. Focused, purposeful, the way an animal roots when it smells something real. Cora got down on her hands and knees in that corner, which was not a thing she could have explained to anyone in Haller's Creek without confirming every opinion they held about her mental state, and she pressed her palm flat against the ground. The clay was cool, not cool the way shade clay is cool on a warm morning, cooler than that, the kind of cool that comes up from below. She pressed her ear to the ground the way her father had once showed her, half seriously, as a child's trick. And under the clay, very faint, so faint she was not certain at first that she was not imagining it, she heard water. She did not tell anyone. She went home, ate a small supper, and lay in the dark doing arithmetic. If there was a spring under the northeast corner of the hollow, running under the limestone shelf, it would explain why that corner held mud later into the summer than the rest of the 40. It would explain why the old creek bed that ran along the property's eastern edge had, in the rare wet springs, run longer and stronger than the other small drainages in the area. It would explain if she was right, quite a lot. But she was not certain she was right, and she was not prepared to stake anything on a sound she might have imagined with her ear in the mud. So she let the pigs tell her. This was the method she had reasoned herself to in the long quiet of those first weeks. A pig is not a geologist, but a pig's nose is better than any tool she owned, and if what was under that corner of the hollow was worth getting to, the sisters would get to it. She moved the pigs' supplemental feeding station to the far western end of the hollow, so that the northeast corner had no human-placed food to confuse the signal, and she waited. May arrived with the studied indifference of a Missouri spring that has not yet decided between mud and fire. The days were mild, and the nights still had teeth, and the sisters worked the northeast corner of the hollow with an intensity that would have been alarming if you did not know what it meant. Cora watched from the fence line. She watched the depth of their work and the quality of the mud that came up behind their snouts, and the places where the limestone shelf made their rooting difficult, but did not make them stop. The other pigs, the general and the senator and the remaining 54, were by now considerably improved in condition. They had found the wild leeks and the green briar tips and the soft clay grubs and the various roots and tubers that a 40-acre piece of rough land turns out to contain when an animal is motivated to find them. They were filling out. Their coats had recovered some gloss. Frank Geller, driving past on the road in early May, slowed his wagon to look at them through the fence with an expression that he quickly rearranged into neutral when he saw Cora watching from the gate. She did not say anything. Being right, she had found, was its own kind of reply. On the 9th of May, a Tuesday, the sisters broke through the limestone shelf. Cora was not there when it happened. She arrived at first light the following morning to find a crater, roughly 4 feet across and 18 inches deep, at the northeast corner of the hollow, and the bottom of the crater was shining. There was water in it, clear water, coming up slowly through broken limestone and red clay, pooling in the bottom of the hole the sisters had made. The sisters themselves were standing in the middle of it, absolutely filthy from snout to shoulder, with the expression of animals who have been entirely vindicated. Cora stood at the edge of that hole for a long time. The arithmetic moved through her head like water, finding its own level. A spring meant water that did not depend on rain. Water that did not depend on rain meant the hollow could be wet when the rest of the county was dry. A wet hollow meant feed, clover, wild leeks, root crops, mast. Feed meant pigs that did not need bought corn to grow. Pigs that did not need bought corn to grow meant that the $18 she had spent, the tax bill coming in August, the mules' feed, the winter ahead, all of it recalculated itself in the dawn light. And for the first time since her father's death, she could see clearly how the numbers could work in her favor. She widened the hole herself over the following 2 weeks, working with a mattock and a long iron bar, clearing broken limestone and clay until she had an opening 4 feet across and nearly 3 feet deep, and the water that welled up was cool and clear and tasted of iron and stone. She packed the edges with flat limestone she hauled up from the deeper shelf, building a basin that would hold the flow. She cut a channel in the clay that directed the overflow east toward the old creek bed, which in the 3rd week of May, for the first time in 2 springs, ran. It did not run for long, 3 days, 5 days, just enough to wet the channel and confirm that it was real. But Cora saw it, and old Marta Hofer, walking out to the 40 on a Thursday afternoon because she had wondered, saw it too. "There it is," Marta said, standing at the channel's edge with her hands in her apron. She said it the way a person says a thing they knew was coming. "A pig will root what a plow cannot move." "You knew there was water there," Cora said. "I thought there might be. My husband thought so too once. He walked that ground in 1858. Marta looked at the channel, the thin, bright thread of it moving through the clay. He decided the rock was too much work to find out. She looked at Cora. "You let the pigs decide." "They were more motivated than I was," Cora said, and Marta laughed, a real laugh, the kind that belongs to old women who have earned the right to find things genuinely funny. Cora did not announce the spring to the town. She was not, by nature, a person who announced things. She simply worked. She expanded the channel. She planted the margins of the hollow in clover and turnip and the low wild grasses that grew thick and quick in wet ground. She moved the pigs in rotation, one group in the hollow with access to the spring, the others in the eastern briar section, which they were steadily clearing, and the south-cleared section, where she had a kitchen garden that was, by June, producing more than she could eat. She sold the excess at the Haller's Creek Market on Saturdays, arriving early and leaving late, and saying very little, which was consistent with her general approach to town. The pigs were, by June, remarkable animals. The general had grown to a size that a man from St. Louis, passing through to look at bottomland properties, stopped his horse to stare at through the fence for a full 2 minutes before continuing on. The senator had achieved a calm authority that Cora found, if she was honest, more impressive than most of the human authority she had encountered in Haller's Creek. The 60 head were fat and healthy and clean because pigs with access to running water are, contrary to their popular reputation, quite tidy animals given half a chance. And the Voss Forty's northeast corner, where the spring ran, smelled of mud and stone and clover rather than the things that caused the downwind neighbors of hog operations to develop opinions. A boy named Eli Crane began appearing at the fence line in late June. He was 11 years old, the youngest of 4 Crane children, a quiet and watchful boy whose family farmed the next property to the north, and who had, as far as Cora could tell, no assigned chores in the direction of her fence, but found reasons to be there anyway. The first time she saw him, she nodded. The second time, she went to the fence and asked if he was useful. He said he thought he probably was. She gave him the job of morning count, 60 stones from left pocket to right, and told him she would give him supper on the days he worked, because she could see from the careful way he ate that supper at home was not always abundant. Eli named the pigs, not the 60 of them, but the notable ones, the ones that had character. The general had already been named by Cora, but Eli gave him a surname, General Worth. The senator became Senator Beaumont, for reasons Eli declined to explain. The sisters acquired individual names, Agnes, Ruth, and Pearl, and were given a status in Eli's private hierarchy of the farm that bordered on official. By July, Eli was arriving before Cora did, and the count was always right, and the fence was always checked, and the water channel was always cleared of the small limestone chips that worked their way into it overnight. Cora never said he was necessary, he simply was. August arrived in Missouri the year 1885, the way it always did in those years, like the open door of a furnace. The creek north of town dropped to a series of warm, disconnected pools. The corn in the flat fields went yellow at the margins, and held there, not quite failing, not quite thriving. The wells around Haller's Creek that were fed by surface drainage began to taste of mud. People watched the sky with the particular expression of those who need something from it and do not believe it will be provided. The Voss 40's spring did not drop. Limestone aquifer springs do not, in the way of surface-fed wells, disappear in a single summer. The flow diminished, as it will, but the basin held, and the channel still ran, thin as a knife blade, into the eastern creek bed. The clover in the hollow stayed green while everything around it burned gold and brown. The pigs stayed fat. Cora's kitchen garden, which she was watering by hand from the basin, bucket by slow bucket every evening, continued to produce tomatoes, beans, turnips, and squash, in quantities that required 2 baskets to carry to the Saturday market. At the August market, a cook named Sylvie Gand, who ran the dining room of the Hartwell Hotel in the county seat, stopped at Cora's table and picked up a tomato. She turned it the way people who know food turn things they are considering. She smelled it. She set it down and picked up another one. Then she looked at Cora and said, "How many can you bring me every week?" and named a price that was 30% above what Cora had been asking. Cora considered the offer for a moment that was, she knew, exactly the length of time needed to seem deliberate rather than desperate. "I can bring you what I bring here," she said. 7 to 10 pounds of tomatoes, 4 to 6 pounds of beans, turnips when they run. "And in the fall?" Sylvie asked. "Squash, parsnips, late beans if the heat breaks." "And pigs?" Cora said she would have 3 or 4 ready for slaughter in October. Sylvie Gand said she would pay $4 a head for pigs fed on spring clover and not penned corn, because the meat tasted different, she said, and it did. Cora noted the price and confirmed the arrangement, and folded the paper Sylvie handed her with the hotel's address into her pocket, with the careful neutrality of a person who does not allow themselves to feel a thing until they are alone. She felt it on the road home. Riding Douglas through the afternoon heat with the empty baskets rattling behind her, she let herself feel the full weight of it, the arithmetic reordering itself again, the tax paid, the winter provisioned, money left beyond that, money that meant choices rather than survival. She did not cry because she was not a person who cried easily. But she spoke to Douglas at some length, and Douglas, for once, did not have opinions about it. The tax assessor, a man named Thomas Breck, came to the 40 in the second week of September. He was a man of middle height and considerable administrative confidence, and he had heard, as everyone in the county seat had heard, that the Voss girl had done something unexpected with the worst parcel in Haller's Creek Township. What he had come to do, he explained, with the smooth warmth of someone performing concern, was to reassess the 40's taxable value, which had until now been recorded at a very low figure appropriate to unproductive rockland. Given the improvements, he said, and the clear evidence of productive use, the township would be adjusting the assessment. The new figure would be 4 times the previous one. The quarterly tax on the new assessment came to $18.40. Cora listened to all of this with the stillness she had developed over the previous 18 months, the stillness that was not absence, but attention. "I would like to see the assessment records for the Schreiber parcel," she said, naming the property 3/4 of a mile east that had recently been purchased by a man named Dalton, who was known to have friends in the county administration. The Schreiber parcel had, in the past year, received 2 new outbuildings and a substantial corral, and its assessment had not been revisited. Thomas Breck's expression shifted in a small but visible way. "I believe the township records are public," Cora added pleasantly. Breck said that of course they were, and that he would look into the matter of the Schreiber parcel's assessment, and that perhaps the Voss 40 reassessment could be reviewed once comparable properties had been evaluated. He wrote nothing down. He left. Cora wrote a letter that evening to the county clerk citing the specific statute that required uniform assessment across properties of comparable improvement level, and she sent it with Eli the following morning because Eli was fast on his feet and reliable, and because having a task made the walk to town feel like something more than an errand. 3 weeks later, the Voss 40's assessment was revised to twice its original value, which was still not equal to the Schreiber parcel, but was not, as the original revision had been, an ambush dressed as a procedure. Cora paid the new quarterly tax in full in cash, which Breck accepted with the expression of a man who had expected to have leverage and discovered somewhat late that he did not. The drought came the following year. This is the thing this story has been building toward, though it arrived as the worst things do without announcing itself. The summer of 1886 did not begin as a drought year. May was normal. June was warm but not unreasonable. It was in July that the sky closed like a fist and held, and by the first week of August the flat fields of Haller's Creek Township were failing visibly, the corn going thin and pale, the hay cutting poor and sparse, the cattle on the open range beginning to drift toward any shade they could find. The town well dropped 4 feet in 3 weeks. The creek north of town was gone to standing pools, and the pools were going to mud. People who had said nothing would survive on the Voss. 40 watched their own comfortable and well-situated farms begin to show the arithmetic of a summer with no rain, and the arithmetic was not kind. The Voss 40's spring held, not abundantly. The basin was lower than it had been, and the overflow channel ran only in the mornings, when the night's cool had slowed the evaporation. But it held, and the hollow held its green, and the 60 pigs, now in their second year, sleek and substantial, and entirely past any resemblance to the starved wretches Cora had driven through Harold Ennis's broken fence, moved through their rotation of the 40 with the unhurried authority of animals that have never had a reason to worry. They were, all of them, enormously fat. Sylvie Gahn's quarterly order had been filled without fail. Cora had sold 4 head in the fall and 6 in the spring, replacing them from the natural increase of the herd, which the Senator and General Worth had contributed to with what could only be described as institutional commitment. She had 27 piglets in the south section by August, small and extravagantly noisy, and entirely certain of their importance. It was Eli who first told her about the Groover family. The Groovers farmed 80 acres to the west, flat good bottomland that in a normal year produced fine corn and a comfortable margin, and in a drought year produced nothing and a debt that collected interest from the bank in town at a rate that did not vary with the weather. Walter Groover had come to Haller's Creek from Indiana in 1878, and he was a man who had always been large and physical and not interested in receiving help, and the drought was working on him visibly. His wife Clara had been seen at the general store pricing dried beans with the expression of a woman running very small numbers against each other and not liking what they added up to. Cora sent Eli to the Groovers on a Tuesday morning with a basket of turnips and a note. The note said she had more vegetables than she could use, and would he be willing to send the children over on Thursday afternoons to help with the kitchen garden in exchange, because she was short-handed. This was, they both understood perfectly well, a polite architecture around the truth, which was that the Groovers needed food, and Cora had it. Walter Groover came himself on Wednesday evening, standing at her gate with the basket empty and his hat in his hands, and an expression that was doing considerable work to prevent itself from becoming something else. "Clara says to thank you," he said. "There is more where that came from," Cora said. "I cannot eat it all." He looked at the pigs in the hollow, the green of the clover, the glint of the basin in the last of the evening light. He had, she saw, the expression she had been watching form on various faces in Haller's Creek for the past month, the expression of a person reconsidering premises they had been entirely confident in. "I said things," he said, "about this place." "Most people did," she said. "I said a young woman alone couldn't make anything of it." "Most people said that, too." He looked at her for a moment. "I was wrong," he said, with the particular difficulty of a man for whom that sentence costs something. "You have 80 acres of good flat bottomland," Cora said. "The drought doesn't last forever. Come fall, you'll have what I don't." She sold him 4 piglets at cost in September, payment deferred to the following spring at no interest, because he needed breeding stock to start again, and she had more piglets than she needed, and because the act of choosing fair terms over profitable ones was, she had discovered, its own kind of satisfaction, the solid, clean-edged satisfaction of a thing done correctly. Harold Ennis was the one who finally forced the confrontation, not in the dramatic form that trouble announces itself in stories, but in the way that greed operates in real life, quietly and with procedural justification. In October of 1886, Harold Ennis, who had been watching the value of the Voss 40 pigs accumulate through 2 years of market days and hotel orders and word that passed through Haller's Creek, the way all word passes through a small town, presented himself to a lawyer in the county seat named Colden with a claim. He had, he said, sold those 60 pigs to Cora Voss under terms he now disputed. He had been in distress, he said. She had taken advantage of a man in distress, and the terms of sale had not been properly witnessed, and he believed a portion of the profit from those pigs over the intervening 2 years ought rightly to come back to him. The lawyer wrote a letter. The letter arrived at the Voss 40 on a cold Thursday in late October, and Cora read it standing at the gate because she had taken it from Eli's hand as she walked out to start the morning count. She read it twice. She put it in her pocket with the counting stones. She finished the count, 60 stones, all accounted for, and then she went inside and wrote her reply. The bill of sale she had made Harold Ennis sign on the day of purchase, on a sheet of her father's stationery, in the kitchen of the Voss house, witnessed by the Dewey brothers, who were standing right there waiting for their assignment, was in the box under her bed where she kept every document that had ever mattered. The terms of sale were plain. $18 for 60 head, delivered to the Voss 40 at the buyer's arrangement. Harold Ennis's signature was on it. The Dewey brothers' signatures were on it. The date was on it. Cora enclosed a copy in her reply to the lawyer, noted the names and current addresses of both Dewey brothers, and informed Colden, with a courtesy that she hoped was difficult to receive, that she was prepared to appear before any tribunal the county provided, at any date convenient to the court. She heard nothing further from Colden. She heard, through the medium of the general store and the Saturday market, that Harold Ennis had gone to considerable expense retaining that lawyer, and had received in return the information that his case had no foundation. She heard this third hand, which was the only way such things were discussed in Haller's Creek. She received it without satisfaction, or with only enough satisfaction to confirm that she was human, and then she went back to work. It was the 3rd week of October, and the drought had broken. Rain came out of the northwest the way it returns after a long absence, tentatively at first, then with conviction, 2 days of steady, soaking rain that filled every dry channel in the county and brought the creek north of town back to life and washed the summer's dust from every surface. The flat fields that had burned brown in August began improbably to show a faint green pressure along the margins where any seed had survived. People came out of their houses to stand in it, which is what people do after a drought. Stand in the rain without umbrellas, as if they need to confirm with their own skin that it is actually happening. Cora stood at the edge of the hollow in the rain on the second evening and watched the spring basin overflow with a force it had not had since May. The overflow channel ran full, and the eastern creek bed ran, and the green of the hollow caught the last gray light of the afternoon and held it. The pigs were in the briar section, entirely unbothered by the weather, rooting with their customary purposeful calm. Eli was under the eave of the small tool shed she had built against the eastern fence, watching the rain with the expression of an 11-year-old who has discovered that standing in a dry place, watching rain, is a pleasure available to those who have built a roof to stand under. By November, the story had completed its turn. The drought had done what droughts do to the unprepared, which is to say it had sorted the county's fortunes in a way that all the previous social arrangements had not. 3 operations on the flat bottomland had taken bank loans against their crops and failed to produce crops, and the bank's patience was not unlimited. The Schreiber parcel, now Dalton's parcel, had lost its cattle to the summer's failed hay. The Groover family had survived thinly on what Cora had given and sold them, and Walter Groover had told the story of the 4 piglets and the deferred terms to enough people that it had taken on a life of its own, in the way that stories of uncommon generosity do in places where generosity is uncommon. People came to buy from her, not tentatively, not with the slow, reluctant approach of those asking a favor, but directly at the gate, with money in hand and requests that were specific. Could she sell a dressed hog? Could she spare seed turnips? Did she know of any other rough land in the county with limestone aquifer potential, because there was a man in the next township who had been trying to sell a Rocky 40 for 3 years, and maybe it was not so worthless as it looked? Cora answered these questions with the plain economy of someone who has been carrying knowledge alone for a while and finds the act of sharing it less costly than she had expected. On a Saturday morning in November, Sylvie Gond drove out from the county seat herself, unannounced, with a proposition. She wanted a standing order year-round for pigs, vegetables, and whatever Cora could produce from that kitchen garden. She named a price. Cora listened, considered the arithmetic, named a slightly lower price, and explained why, because the lower price was sustainable through the lean months, and the higher price was not, and a sustainable arrangement was worth more to both of them than a profitable one that broke before spring. Sylvie Gand looked at her for a long moment. "You're not what I expected," she said, "from what people said." "What did people say?" Cora asked, though she knew. "That you were stubborn and strange and running a bad bet." "I was stubborn," Cora allowed. "The rest is still being determined." Sylvie laughed, and they shook hands at the gate, and the arrangement they made that morning would run, without significant interruption, for 11 years. It is not a complicated story in the end. A young woman alone acquired the one thing no one else wanted, and she paid attention to it, and she let the animals tell her what was in it. And what was in it was water in a dry county. She did the arithmetic every night in the dark, and she kept her counsel, and she did not argue with the town's opinion of her, because she had learned early that a thing's only real argument is what it does. The spring ran when the drought came. The pigs were fat when every other herd was failing. The green stayed green. All of this had the appearance of luck from the outside, which is what good, patient preparation always looks like from the outside. Old Marta Hofer came to the gate in December, walking more slowly than she had in spring, with a jar of preserved plums from her garden. She stood at the fence and looked at the hollow, which was lush in a way that Missouri hills in December generally are not. The green of the clover still holding in the wet ground around the spring, the pigs moving through it with their customary dignity. "You let the pigs decide," she said again, as she had said it at the spring channel months before. "You told me what to let them look for," Cora said. Marta considered this. "My husband said, 'The land knows what it needs to become. You only have to listen to it long enough to find out.'" She handed the plums over the gate. "He was usually right about the important things." Cora held the jar. The glass was still warm from Marta's kitchen. "Was he right about the limestone?" she asked. "He was right that there was water under it," Marta said. "He was wrong that the rock was too much work to find out." She smiled, a small private smile of the kind that belongs to old women who have outlasted their doubts. "He should have bought pigs." The spring still ran the following March and the March after that. The 60 pigs became 80, became 100, became a herd of such quality that buyers from St. Louis began appearing on the Howler's Creek Road with a regularity that Frank Geller, watching from the feed and grain, found, as he later admitted, personally instructive. Eli Crane worked the 40 through his teenage years and eventually, at 19, began managing the eastern Brier section himself, which by then was cleared and turned to clover pasture and was no longer, by any definition that would have been recognized in 1885, brier or scrub. He grew up steady and capable, and knew every pig on the place by name, all 100 of them, a feat that visitors found either impressive or faintly alarming, depending on their prior experience with pigs. The Voss 40 was, by 1890, assessed at 12 times its original recorded value. Cora paid the taxes on it quarterly, in full, in cash, and kept the receipts in the box under her bed, with the bill of sale and the letter from Colden's lawyer and the note in Marta's handwriting, with the names of 3 specific root vegetables that did best in limestone-heavy clay soil. She kept that note because it was the beginning, or rather, it was the moment the beginning became visible to her. The door left ajar in March of 1885 that she had finally walked through. She was 30 years old in 1892, and she owned the cleanest 40 acres in the county and a herd that had outlasted a drought and a tax ambush and Harold Ennis's lawyers and the general opinion of Howler's Creek. And she was, quietly and without announcement, one of the most solvent people in the township. The land knows what it needs to become. She had heard that through Marta from a dead man who had been right about the water and wrong about the work. And she had proved the second half of it with $18 and 60 starving pigs, and the willingness to put her ear in the mud and listen. This is what the story means, though it does not require saying outright. The thing that looks like nothing, that everyone has passed over and decided against, sometimes looks that way because no one has yet paid the right kind of attention to it. The right kind of attention is slow and patient and dirty, and requires more faith in the quiet evidence of small animals than in the loud certainty of those who already know what everything is worth. The creek ran all that summer and the summer after. The pigs were fat, the hollow was green, and the town that had laughed came, one family at a time, to the gate of the Voss 40 to see what patient, stubborn, attentive work had made of the worst land in the county. And what it had made was a spring in a dry year, which is to say, it had made everything.